You're probably at least vaguely aware that health is a life-changing topic. In America, chronic diseases such as heart disease, stroke, and diabetes are some of the leading causes of death. But it doesn't have to be that way. These are largely preventable through lifestyle choices, meaning that for many Americans, they are literally digging their graves with their forks, minus the exercise. Does the Bible have any wisdom to share when it comes to health? Is there a particular diet it promotes, whether a meat diet or a plant-based diet? Does God even care about our health? We have with us two great guests to help us answer that question. A medical doctor and a former entertainment executive turned health lecturer. Let's welcome our first guest to Hope at Night, Rico Hill. Woo, Rico, glad you're here, brother.
Wow, look at all these healthy-looking people.
Rico, you were involved in the entertainment industry. Were you always a Christian passionate about health?
No, I wasn't. Actually, when I was in the entertainment industry, that's when my sort of conversion took place. I became very, very concerned about my health, my family's health, and I just started to study my way into it.
Okay, what was your journey as you began to study out this topic of health, and why was it so life-changing for you?
Well, my mother she had triple bypass heart surgery.
Wow.
That was pretty significant.
Yeah.
And I started asking the question, what was it that caused her to have that surgery? That, I mean, it's so traumatic in and of itself. And she was on like 18 different medications.
Wow.
So I was like, what can I do to help? And all things led to a plant-based diet. She went from 18 down to just 2 prescription drugs. So I said, there's something to this.
Wow. How old was she?
She was 65 years old at the time.
So even at the age of 65, there can be a rebound to health.
Look, or the data show that if you make changes, you can actually, if you're 70, 80, you can feel like you're 40.
Wow, wow.
Or 30.
Does the Bible talk about health? Does it contain any principles for health, or is it just about theology?
No, it's not just about theology. The Bible is a book of principles, right? It's all about the principles of life and living life. And certainly, one of the great equalizer is health. Everybody wants it. I have not found anyone who said, please, no thank you, I don't want health. Everybody wants health, right?
Right.
So the Bible would have to have something to say about health.
Because it impacts every area of our life.
Look, they say that a person will spend all of his time and resources to gain wealth. But then when he loses his health, he'll use everything he's got to get it back.
Right. We all know what that's like when we're sick and we're stuck in bed.
Oh, I don't like that. I like to be on the move.
Right. What kind of principles are contained in the scripture about health?
I had done this plant-based summit. It was in New York, and they brought a lot of people there to just hear about what it's like with this movement, because it's a movement around the globe. People are turning plant-based, right? So they wanted to know, is there anything in the Bible that speaks of this? And you had all types of people from all walks of life who came to that plant-based summit. And what they asked me to do was to talk about it from a biblical perspective. In fact, the topic was, what does the Bible say about health? And all you have to do is go to the first 3 chapters of Genesis, the book of Genesis, Genesis being the book of beginnings. And in that book, it talks about what we should eat, how much sunshine we should get, what we should drink, exercise. Everything is contained there by way of principle and the stories that are therein.
So when you go back to the book of Genesis, you find this optimal way of living.
It's all right there, including a plant-based diet.
Could you hone in on one of these other lifestyle principles that make such a significant impact in our life?
Obviously, I think you mentioned in your opening monologue, you talked about exercise. Exercise is critical for us. And we find that there was a man in the beginning. His name was Adam. And Adam was given exercise in the garden, believe it or not. After he's created, as the narrative tells us, that God said, look, you're to tend and keep the garden. Now, what does that mean exactly? I mean, it was a perfect paradise, right? But at the same time, here, this perfect man still needed to be doing his squats. So he had to actually go and pick flowers, pick different types of produce or whatever. And we find now that stretching is so important. sometimes people are doing aerobic exercise, anaerobic exercise, things that are calisthenics, whatever it is, but often what we've missed in the last few years is the importance of just stretching your muscles. And that's what was established in the beginning.
You were part of the entertainment industry, and there's a lifestyle, a fast-paced lifestyle that's connected to the entertainment industry. How did that come into conflict with now your new lifestyle that's embracing these principles of health and as changes are taking place?
I don't think it's any different from my entertainment experience or even my experience now as a producer or as a health lecturer. I'm traveling all the time. I'm on planes, I'm off of planes. I'm going through airports where you can't find anything good to eat. With this fast-paced lifestyle, you have to plan. You have to plan. You have to be intentional. So when I travel, that's the main thing. That's my biggest challenge, is making sure that I've made provisions for me to eat in a way that is going to be healthy for me. So I take stuff with me.
The Bible talks about diets. There are different kinds of diets. When someone says, hey, I'm now following the Bible diet, the biblical diet, but the Bible tells us about different kinds of diets. Could you elaborate a little bit more on the different kinds of diets?
I talked about it quite a bit at the Plant-Based Summit because, again, people were sort of like in the dark. They thought this plant-based thing had just started, right? But in Genesis, in the very first chapter, the original diet, it was fruit, nuts, grains, and seeds. Vegetables didn't come until later, right? So, and it came after this very, very bad mistake took place there in this paradise. But fruits, nuts, grains, and seeds were the original diet. And we find that when you eat, and I think your next guest can really elaborate on this because she's done amazing research on it, but we find that when we eat just a handful of nuts, no salt, no honey or caramelized, just raw nuts. I'm talking about almonds, and I'm talking about walnuts and all these kind of things, cashews. We find that by just eating a handful of those each day extends your life by 2.5 years.
So you're telling me just if I take a handful of almonds a day that my longevity will increase?
Here's the thing. It's a good fat, but it's a fat nonetheless. Okay. So you want to make sure that you don't overdo it. It's all about temperance, which is another principle that we find in the book of Genesis. We need to make sure that we are temperate in all things. You can have something that's really, really good, but you can do way too much of it.
Right. So just because it's good and just because it's healthy doesn't mean that I can eat all of it all day long, nonstop, right?
Exactly. Again, I like to come from looking at the Bible, and if the Bible says it, and then I can go to science and find the same thing, like with the diet, right? The original diet, fruits, nuts, grains, and seeds, everyone, that is anybody, all peer-reviewed studies show that this is the optimal diet, to eat living food, right? And when we do that, what does it do? It extends our lives, right? The second diet was after the fall of man, when sin came in, right? And then what was instituted in the diet, what was placed on the menu was vegetables. And we find that all the science says, a Harvard University study says, of all the things that we could eat, greens pack the greatest punch. That's a direct quote from that study. So this was instituted as a second part of the diet. We find that, like kale, you mentioned that, collards, all your green vegetables actually are wonderful cancer fighters, right? So there was a strategy to this, not something that was just arbitrary, right? And then the third diet we call the emergency diet. All vegetation and fruits and everything was destroyed, and therefore God said you can now eat meat.
Right, so it was being permitted now to eat meat.
It wasn't his perfect plan, but it was a permissive kind of thing. You have permission to do it. It won't be the best, but it will be something that you'll need to do under these emergency situations.
Is there a timing to when eating is most optimal for us?
Well, you want to get up in the morning and have breakfast. Some people like to say, well, you know what, I like to skip breakfast. I don't like breakfast. If you don't have breakfast at the time that, because everything is based on the circadian rhythm, day and night cycle, light and dark. And when the sun comes up, your body's like, all right, it's time to break fast. So you want to actually eat in the morning a nice big breakfast. Here's what we say. Eat breakfast like a king or queen. Eat lunch like a prince or princess. And dinner like a pauper, a poor person. In other words, that means have a nice big breakfast, have a modest sized lunch, and at night, don't eat a lot of food. Because why? Sun is setting, you're going to bed, and you don't want to overtax your system.
Your body is preparing for rejuvenation during the night.
And healing and detoxing. Your body does all those things. Wonderful science has come out now about when are the best times for us to eat. Now, is that a principle in the Bible? Absolutely. When they were in the desert, it was a time when they were in the desert, in the book of Exodus, they had come out of Egypt, they're in the desert, and God has to feed them because they have no food, right? He has to give them water, right? So he brings down, according to the narrative there in Exodus, something from heaven. They call it manna, right? And it came early in the morning, and they had to go gather it, and they would eat it in the morning. So God knows when to feed us. And then it would be a second time that he would feed them in the afternoon. But get this. This is really amazing. He only fed them 2 times a day.
Only 2 times a day.
Yeah, you know what I ask people in my lectures? I say, like I'll ask you, how many of you eat 3 meals a day? How many of you eat 2 meals a day? How many of you eat 1 meal a day all day long? This is not the best way to do it. This is not God's plan. You eat in the morning, you let your system rest, and then you have another meal at a designated time. And then as the sun is setting, then you want to start to prepare the body for rejuvenation.
It seems the digestive system is really the power plant of the entire system. And when the digestive system is overtaxed, there begins to be a sort of a negative impact upon the rest of the body.
Absolutely. You know, I tell people, your stomach and your digestion is the most powerful, most energy expending thing that your body does. It is a violent process with digestive juices and all this churning and all this kind of stuff, and we take it for granted. But it requires a lot of energy. So a lot of times when you go and you're like, I'm trying to lose weight and I'm going to go and get a trainer, they'll tell you, you know what you're going to do? Here's what you're going to do. You're going to eat 5 meals a day, right? 5 meals a day. And not realizing that will help you lose weight, but it will overtax your system, like you said.
You know, there's a lot of bodybuilders that subscribe to this idea of eating every 2 or 3 hours, but the average lifespan on bodybuilders is 40 to 50 years old. These guys that are competing in Mr. Olympia, they're not living very long. They're getting colon cancer, they're getting stomach cancer, they're destroying their digestive system in the very process, but they look like the epitome.
Amazing for about 5 years, and then so you want to make sure that you're following the principle because, I love this text. I don't mean to come on and quote from the Bible so much, but this is where I get my principles from. And there's this one text that says, know you not that he is God, and it is he that made us, right? So if we understand that God made us, we are fearfully and wonderfully made, and he knows exactly what to feed us, when to feed us, how much to feed us, and all of these things, and they're all found in the Bible.
Is science confirming any one of these diets to be the very best diet we can have?
Absolutely. Again, plant-based is number 1, just in terms of longevity. What we're seeing is that there are blue zones. Ever hear of those? Anybody ever hear of blue zones? Okay, let me tell you what blue zones are. Blue zones are 5 geographically confirmed areas in the world where people live longer than anyone else, and there are 5 of them. Number 1, Icaria, Greece. Then there's Sardinia, Italy, where the men are living the longest, up in the highlands. Then there's Okinawa, Japan. Women live the longest, right? Then there's Costa Rica, right? And right here in the United States of America is Loma Linda, California.
There's a blue zone in California.
Right here in the country, in California, Loma Linda, California, Southern California. And what they have found is that these people have the greatest number of centenarians, people who are living 100 years old or more. So, but they looked at all these 5 areas and they said, what are the commonalities? And the commonalities are They eat largely of a plant-based diet. They exercise, not necessarily a gym membership, but they do things naturally like hiking and just doing things that, just keep them active, whatever that is, right? Sometimes we think, oh, I got to get a gym membership. That's fine if you got to do that. But what they have found among these 5 blue zones is that they just, even if it's like in Italy, kneading bread, right? Just exercising in that way. They ride bicycles. So they found that the very principles that we find in Genesis 1, 2, and 3 are the same that are within these people groups.
So there's this group of people that are following these biblical principles, and they are reaping the benefits of it.
Guess what? A lot of them don't even know they're following the biblical principles. They're just following them because they get the benefits of it. Now, there are some certainly in Loma Linda, California, they're following them, and they're looking at, all of it, because, there are laws of health, It's like gravity. You can say, I don't believe in gravity all you want, but go up on a building and try to jump off, gravity's going to pull you down, that law is going to work.
Right.
So in the same way with health, there are principles and laws of health. You know what? You got to drink your water. You got to eat better. You got to exercise, et cetera, et cetera.
Rico, what if someone is listening to this and they're watching this, they said, look, I grew up a different way. I struggle with changing my health behaviors. The idea of taking on a largely plant-based diet, that seems a little bit repulsive. I don't even like eating greens. What would you say to that person who is struggling to make changes to their diet?
We invest in our longevity. Whatever age you are right now, you are making investments right now. And the people who are living the longest can look back at a point when they were confronted with the same dilemma, with the same conundrum. How am I going to do this? And then they made the hard choice, and they did it. It's just like what you're doing in your financial life. You make the investment, it pays dividends in your retirement. And people who go into their retirement and say, I just can't do it, I don't want to do it, I grew up a certain way, they get into their later years and they're like, I wish I had. And we don't want anyone to have that experience.
Wow. Rico, I really appreciate this discussion. I know there's so much more to talk about. It's really exciting.
Yeah,
The topic of health is super exciting.